Hey there guys. Today I want to take a little walk around Stella, my 1989 240 SX. I want to do this as a snapshot to kind of remember where this car sits at this point in time, as I do plan for this to be my forever car. So there will be changes made in the future, but in my mind, this car has finished what I would consider stage one, phase one of this build process. It's kind of something I would have hoped to achieve a couple years ago, a few months after I initially purchased this car. But we're here now, there's no race unless, I want to take this thing to the racetrack. Anyway, back to this little walk around. A little backstory on Stella. This car was actually bought as a replacement for my first car, my beloved 1992 240SX S13, which was also a hatchback. I love that thing, but unfortunately I was kind of dumb and crashed it into a couple trees and trying to avoid some roadkill. Anyway, moving on past that. When I was searching for a replacement car, I actually didn't want another S13 hatchback. What I wanted was something just a little different, slightly different from what I had with Carol. So what I set out to find back when I was in Kansas was an S13 coupe. For those of you who aren't familiar with the body styles, it's more of like, think Fox body notchback. So instead of having a hatchback lift gate, it just has a trunk. So a little smaller interior compartment, but those chassis are known to be a little bit stiffer. If you're familiar with the Midwest, you know that S chassis can be hard to come by. So my choices are pretty limited. There weren't a whole lot of 240s in the first place, and those that were available were either too expensive for me or way outside my traveling budget. Until this one happened to show up. So let me circle back to Carol, because Carol's the reason that I found Stella. And by the way, I'm very sentimental, so I end up naming my cars most of the time. When Carol got sent off to a body shop to get assessed for damage, of course it was going to be totaled, one of the body shop repairmen there noticed the car and happened to ask one of my friends who was working there if the car happened to be for sale. And of course, even if it's crashed, I'm not going to let go of Carol. Actually, the shell's still sitting at my parents' place, so I'll get back to it one of these days. But of course my friend said no, because I was planning to use those parts to swap into another shell because the engine was still good, the suspension, it had an immaculate interior. I was just looking for a shell. And the guy who inquired about Carol happened to have a son who had an S13 shell, which happened to be this one right here. Lived just 30 minutes away, rolling shell, no interior, no engine, transmission, or anything like that, which happened to be perfect for what I needed. Even though it wasn't what I was looking for, it's what I needed. And from there, you guys kind of know the story. Justin and I went to go pick it up, and all the parts from Carol went into Stella. But that's the backstory. Let's get into some of this walk around. So the current color on the car is a Hypnotic Teal Mica by Scion, not a Nissan color. It's really cool to me because it's pretty unique. I don't see very many of them on S chassis, although you see them pretty commonly on Scion XBs, of course, so it's pretty fun to see that on the road. What was really cool for me is not only was it painted on the exterior, but it was painted on the interior as well. So the car was fully gutted, painted on the inside, and that was a big selling point for me because it made this car really clean and really easy to look at and inspect when it was gutted. Not sure what the front bumper is. Actually, I'm not sure what the entire kit is. It is a fiberglass kit. I think it's a replica of the proper kit. As far as wheels go, we're sitting on 5 Ziggin FN01 RCs. It's a discontinued performance cast wheel that they don't make anymore, but I really like them on the car. It's a staggered setup, so we have 17 by 8 plus 35 in the front, if I'm not mistaken, and 17 by 9 plus 20 in the rear. Still a 4-lug setup, which I don't mind at all because I'm too broke to go shopping for bigger brake kits and bigger wheels and tires and whatnot, so these will be here to stay for a while. One of my more proud upgrades is the Z32 30mm aluminum brake calipers with some P2M conversion rotors, which help me keep the 4-lug setup running on Hawk pads with GK Tech braided steel lines. Suspension wise up front, nothing crazy. We just have D2 RS coilovers, pretty old and worn, used, but they do the job just fine. I think they're 9K spring rates up front and 7K in the rear. Z32 calipers in the rear as well. We're also running the drum e-brake assembly from a Z32. It was a big pain in the butt to install, but since this was my daily driver for a while, I really advocated to keep that setup. So really glad to have that. Not sure if I'd do it again. All right, and the tire setup for the front is a 225/45/17. It's a Bridgestone RE 970 AS or a 980 AS. And the backs are some Brom 235/45/17s from my good friend Josh. It sits kind of high at its current state, but I don't mind. As I said, I daily drove this for a while, and I really wanted this to be really drivable without having to worry about, cracking my bumper too much on driveways and whatnot. I'm personally a big fan of the more meaty tire setup, so I don't mind that these are 17s and have a bit more tire sidewall on them. I think it's a really cool look, and it's just something that's grown on me. Moving to the back, we have a OEM Type X wing from my friend Jordan back in Kansas. Still regrets to this day selling me the swing, but I'm really glad I bought it off him for a good deal before all of the JDM prices are getting too out of hand and crazy. As far as the back, some of you guys really hate these taillights, but I'm really a big fan of them. Plus I'm too broke for Type X tails, but these are just eBay Altezza style taillights with a black housing rather than the chrome one on them. I think it kind of fits a whole teal and black vibe that I have going with the small trim and chrome. Trying to match some of the silver that I have in the car, but it's something that I enjoy, so they're going to be here to stay for a while. I do think that the eBay center section, however, is gaudy awful. That's why I'm running a Type X OEM Nissan reverse garnish, I guess you would say. And below that, the tail lights, the rear S13 taillight garnish as well. Maybe this is the garnish and this is just the center reverse lights. One of the modifications on this car from the previous owners that I think was kind of strange was this aftermarket sunroof. So this was originally a slick top car, and one of the previous owners opted to install this aftermarket option. It still works. It tilts up a little bit so you can get some air in. I kind of like it. Not gonna lie, it was kind of a pain to seal this inside because it was so worn and sat outside for so long. There was no rubber seal, so I applied some sealant to it so it wouldn't leak in the rain anymore. It is old and weathered though, and most people would probably hate this option, but it's the setup that came on this car, so rather than try to cover it up, I've decided to keep it because, I mean, it probably adds a little weight, but it's probably negligible for what I'm using it for. We have the stock metal hood here with this interesting notch right here. A lot of people ask me what this is for. This car used to have an SR20 in it when in one of its previous builds by the previous owners, which ran top feed injectors. And so he ran into clearance issues with the hood and decided to notch this and build it in around there. I think it's a cool, neat little feature that's useless to me now, but I kind of overlook it sometimes. As you guys know, we're still running the pop-up headlights, which everybody seems to love. Like I said, most of these parts came off of Carroll, which is why I'm running this red headlight cover on the right side, because the original one on this car was damaged. Mine happened to not be damaged, so not only does it serve a functional purpose because it replaces that damaged part, but I think it's kind of a cool throwback to where this car came from and all the parts that it came from. It's really sentimental to me, so I'll probably never end up changing it. Probably looks weird, but hey, I'm a sentimental guy. What can you do? That was another thing I originally wanted to do with this car, was convert it to a S13 Sylvia front end. However, those conversion parts are pretty costly and out of my budget for the time. Didn't really serve any functional purpose, and the pop-ups were still working, so I kept with them. I've been slowly collecting the parts to convert over. However, the more parts that I get for the Silvia conversion, the more unsure I am of actually getting rid of the pop-ups and going to a Silvia front. So I've come down to the decision that until I get another S13 or come back to Carol, I'm gonna stick with the pop-ups, and then once I get that S13, that extra S13, or come back to Carol and rebuild her, I'll have the pop-ups on that other S13, and then finally make the Silvia front conversion for this car to make it a SIL 80 or SIL 40. This car runs an S13 SR20 red top engine mated to a 5-speed SR20 transmission. Though the engine is pretty much in stock-ish form, it has been replaced. Some of the engine internals have been replaced with Eagle connecting rods, stock compression CP pistons, MLS head gasket, ARP head studs and main studs. What else do we have? We have an oversized ISR oil pan. We have, though the head is pretty much stock, we have Tomei 256 11.5 millimeter pond cams on here, which drop in. I really wish I would have gone with the supporting springs and valve retainers and all of that, but it does work. Sounds really good. I really like it. On the exhaust side, we have a brand new Garrett S15 Spec R Turbo, the GT2560R, connected to the stock exhaust manifold. Really good for longevity and reliability. I have had it ceramic coated to kind of help with heat retention and whatnot back here. I don't know if you'll notice, but we do have an AC line hooked up in the back because this car has all of the parts for running proper AC. It just needs to be charged and fixed to run, and I need to get a belt for it. Going into the turbo, we have an epoxy filter connected to a Z32 MAF into another epoxy turbo intake. Off of that, we have our ISR intercooler piping feeding into a Mishimoto intercooler, as well as we have a Mishimoto radiator here. HKS super sequential blow-off valve, which is recirculated back into the epoxy intake. We have a Turbo Smart dual stage electronic, but really it's a manual boost controller. I currently don't have it installed, but I do have a Cusco strut tower brace. To the front of the engine real quick, we do have this nice GK Tech oil catch can. A lot of people ask what that is. Just a big catch can. I don't find that I have a whole lot of blow-by that gets caught in this thing. It stays pretty empty, so you know, it does look nice in the engine bay. We're still running the clutch style engine fan instead of electric radiator fans. It's pretty reliable, and I don't have to mess with making sure that the relays stay on and whatnot. And it's pretty effective. A lot of people recommend them, and I definitely recommend them. GK Tech fan with the OEM fan shroud. Can't go wrong there. We have a phase 2 motor trend coolant overflow tank, which has been pretty useless because nothing ever sits in here, and if it does sit in there, it goes back into the radiator. On the intake side, we have stock intake manifold. As far as the fuel injector goes, fueling system goes, we have Dishworks 550cc fuel injectors being fed by a Dishworks 340 liter per hour fuel pump in the back, all being regulated by a Nismo fuel pressure regulator. I highly recommend if you can run one of these guys. It's super simple, and though they're expensive, it's been better than the old Aeromotive fuel pressure regulator unit that I used to have. Ignition setup is some BK7RE NGK copper plugs connected to some phase 2 motor trend. I know you guys are going to give me some hate. Phase 2 motor trend ignition coils. All of it's being run by a stock ECU tune by RS Enthalpy. Martin's the man, really knowledgeable, and if you can get a dyno tune from him, I would highly recommend it. If you don't quite have the money to go standalone just yet, like I'd like to do with this car, then I personally think RS Enthalpy is the way to go. It's been super helpful to me and really hasn't let me down yet. We have an oil filter relocation kit to the back shock tower to help kind of make oil changes pretty easy. And the shining jewel in this engine bay is my nice fancy HKS oil cap. The last time I had this car dynoed with the setup that it has now, it made just under 300 horsepower on a rolling inertia dyno. It'll read different on any other dyno. Trust me, probably way lower. But it's a really fun power to have in a car that weighs 2,640 pounds, which is really light by today's standards. I think the engine setup will stay the way it is because the power outguns any kind of driving skill that I could possibly have. And I don't think I'll ever outgrow this car. And I think it'd be fun to kind of keep it at that power level to kind of try to turn it into a bit of a momentum car when I finally take this thing out on track. Moving to the interior, we have a Nardi 360 millimeter, I believe, steering wheel. One of my favorite pieces. It feels really nice in your hands and is a really solid unit. Horn button doesn't work, of course, but we'll get to that another time. As far as seating goes, we have Sparco Evo L bucket seats, which are outdated, but they fit pretty well and are pretty comfortable for daily driving use. We do have the stock S13 gauge cluster setup, though I am running an S13 SR20 gauge or RPM tachometer, which gives us a 7,500 RPM red line with a 9K total rev count. I'm a big fan of these just because it's old and may not be as accurate, but it's just fun seeing those needles go back and forth, whereas a lot of people are converting to digital dash displays, which are cool, but I think this is, I don't know, something that I've just grown accustomed to. Really neat side note, this car apparently only has 68,500 and so miles, although this is a dual cam gauge cluster, so take that with a grain of salt. Pretty basic gauge setup with our pillar mounted gauges, AEM air fuel ratio, autometer, boost gauge. Back over to the center, we don't have the AC dash vents anymore. It's been replaced with some gauges, of course, with a custom gauge mount plate made by my father, provided by my father. Autometer, oil and water temp gauges. Still have stock HVAC controls. The radio has been replaced with a radio replacement dash plate. We're running DEFI oil pressure and fuel pressure gauges and some little toggle switch that light up when the car is powered on, of course. These two don't really go to anything, but this is my high and low boost controller. We have USB and Type-C charging here, so if I need to charge my phone, I can do that. And one of my favorite additions here is this Bluetooth radio control unit. So instead of having a single DIN unit, all of my radio sounds are run off this Bluetooth unit. It does have an aux cord in case I wanted to run it off aux power, but I really like this dash unit, but the Bluetooth function has been super convenient, and having this knob here has been like a nice throwback to kind of that old school feel of having something to turn rather than having buttons. Really cool and simple to have. It's called an NVX XUBT3, I believe. They were sold out at the time, but I'm sure they'll come back in stock soon, and I just think it's a really clean way to kind of keep radio functionality if you are looking to kind of get rid of your radio for some gauge space. Over here in the passenger footwell, we have our Phase 2 Motor Trend checker floor mats with our mandatory fire extinguisher. You know, they require these things at most tracks because, you know, it's a safety requirement. I kind of think they should be required in all 240s because they're bound to be broken down. And it's just a good thing to have in your car. If your project car ever catches on fire, it's gonna be super sad to see that thing burn down. So always have one in your car, I recommend. Tomei shift knob with the stock shifter throw. It's a bit loose, but I think we can replace some springs in here with some GK Tech units and tighten that up a little bit. Now, one of my favorite bits here that I think goes unnoticed is my little toy charms that I have here. This one's for fending off bad dreams, I think, and this one's for fending off bad drivers. So just a cute little trinket I have thrown around here. I don't notice it anymore. It doesn't get in my view. The last bit I have here is this Garmin GPS. I used to have it here because my speedometer used to be broken, but I had that replaced recently. So now it kind of just stays here for video game purposes. I don't know if you've ever driven a racing game, but you've got the road out in front of you and you've got your little mini map right here so you can see what corners are up ahead. And that's really the only reason I keep it here. It's just a fun little dumb thing. So like I said, gutted rear interior. Really nice paint job. I'm super thankful that when the previous owner painted this, they had it painted inside and out, and it just looks really nice having this gloss finish in here. I think I'll probably keep it gutted so I can kind of show this off. As far as the battery goes, we're running an Odyssey dry cell battery. It's a PC925, running the bigger battery because I used to daily this thing and I needed the cold cranking amperage when it was cold out. All of that's mounted to a Street Faction Engineering battery box. Really solid, really nice looking piece. And it's all cut off by a PowerWorks 150 amp fuse breaker. So really easy if I need to cut power, I can just cut it right back here. One of the big benefits of having the battery back here is not only the redistribution of weight to the back where it's really light, but it also makes hardwiring your fuel pump easier just because of the proximity from the battery to the fuel pump there. One of the other neat things about this car in particular that nobody is ever going to notice, unless you're a diehard S13 guy, is that the radio antenna has been shaved off. So right here in this section of the rear quarter panel is where the radio antenna usually sits. It's been shaved off and filled in by the previous owner. Really useful since I don't really use the radio anymore. I just play music off my phone and makes it look pretty clean. I think I'm missing a few things. More on the rear suspension, we are running adjustable traction, tow, and camber arms. No crazy settings or anything like that. Pretty close to stock. I think I tried to run like a degree of camber in the rear, 0 tow, and stock traction length. As far as the rear differential, I'm like 80% sure it's still a viscous limited slip differential, but it is an R32 limited slip differential. Really pretty sure it's a VLSD rather than like a Nismo clutch LSD, which would be really awesome, but not sure if that's what we have or not. I'll have to open it up sometime. What's really nice about this diff it is running a bigger capacity differential cover, which is finned. So that helps with cooling and whatnot. As far as the sway bar setup goes, we are running a bigger adjustable rear sway bar in the back with polyurethane bushings, although it's a stock setup in the front. More on bushings and transmission mounts. Engine is sitting on ISR polyurethane engine mounts, which I do not recommend. There are way better ways to mount the engine in the car. It's just a big pain to install them. I'm sorry guys, I love a lot of your products, but they're just dangerous, honestly. Go with a GK Tech unit or Nismo engine mounts. I may go back to those because those felt really nice. It's just really sketchy putting the ISR mounts in. The transmission mount though, that we're running polyurethane ISR is great. Really cleans up any slack in your, not really slack in the shifter field, but the shifter doesn't move around on you when you're aggressively on the car. I think that's pretty much it for the setup of the car. If there's anything else you guys are interested in knowing, just drop a comment, let me know, and I'll get them answered for you. There are plenty of things that I'd like to do with this car, but as it sits right now, it's pretty complete in my eyes. And we'll get on to the next best thing soon. So, hope you guys enjoyed this little video. Sorry it was a little long and I kind of stammered on, but hopefully you guys enjoyed it and got something out of it. Have a great day. I'll catch you next time.